show that I'm trying to set. It happens to be a very important show to me. That means I gotta pick the music, I gotta write the lead-ins, and I gotta find some poetry.
Yeah, we gotta get poetic on a sonic level on the Matt Sager podcast, and that's what we're gonna do. I have upped my game with Clint Eastwood drops. Every young upstart wannabe radio guy watches that terrible movie at one point or another in their life. That's Clint's Dave Herman impression in Play Misty for Me, coming up with poetry to talk up a whole lot of love. You know, there was a man on a mountaintop who once breathed deep of the... Dave hated rock music from everything I was able to tell. How are you? I'm Matt Sager, and I'm happy to start a new week of the Matt Sager podcast. When I announced last week that I'm going to do this every day, I really ought to have stipulated every weekday. Weekends, that's Matt's time. Now, granted, I like the show a lot. I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it's highly unlikely that the weekends will be spent not doing something or another for this podcast. I'm actually recording a bunch of what you're hearing now, Monday, on Sunday, because I'm a mental patient. And as you might have noticed, I got myself a little soundboard. It's going to be, oh boy, get ready. I'm going to be a child in a candy store tonight. I always thought that Fred Norris had the best job in the world, curating and painting this real incredible landscape with his drops, and I always wanted to do that, and now I can. But I need to use my powers responsibly. I can't just go around willy-nilly doing stuff like that. It's unacceptable, and frankly, I'm not okay with it. So, with that, welcome to the week. The cast that was going to accompany me this week is sadly not going to happen. You know, I'm expanding the show. Want more co-hosts, comedy writers, voice people, production, anything you want to do. And in particular, guests. I really am all about cross-promotion. If you've got another podcast, if you're a comedian, musician, traveling mime, as long as you're doing something artistic or political, I'm all about just making this a more community experience. It's nice, and don't get me wrong, I enjoy the power of a monologue. If that is what this ends up being, that's completely okay. But if you'd like to be part of it, I'd certainly like to discuss you being a part of it. The people who are going to be able to do it with me this week will be able to do it with me at some point in the future. But I'm not going to go around making announcements because it's not my schedule, and I'm not paying. So, you know, let's be real. Anything you want to do is for our mutual benefit and for fun. That's all.
We have a heavy divertation tonight. We had a very Darrison bite. Let's go ahead, Terrace chasing those for the bit, the head of the pit.
All right, clearly I can't be trusted with this soundboard. It's like giving a shotgun to a monkey. I have no respect for the sanctity of this soundboard and the destruction it can wreak. For those who couldn't be here this week, that's fine. I would never do something like put them all on a list and say, you can't contribute to the show in the future. That would be not only vindictive and petty and thin-skinned, but it would be damaging to the integrity of my podcast. It would be dangerous for the show's future to go around doing stuff like that, to say, well, you know, you could be an amazing co-host or news person, contributor of some sort. But because you didn't show up this week, your privileges have been revoked. That would be irresponsible for this podcast. It would be for the listeners, the people who depend on this podcast. It would be a sort of betrayal, putting my own feelings over the safety of the integrity of this podcast. It would be just wildly reckless, and I would hope that the listeners of this show would sort of rise up and say, all right, sir, that's a step too far. Listen, I get that they couldn't be here this week, but you can't just pull them. You can't say they can't contribute in the future. That is a bridge too far, and this podcast depends on them. being available to us in the event of a sonic emergency of some sort that might require their unique expertise. So, sir, knock it off with lists and crap and put the security of your podcast over your own fragile ego. You big, dead-eyed, 6'2", 300-pound monster, is what I would hope you would say to me about this podcast if I were a taller fellow who weighed a bit more. I'm going to take this music bed down now because it's driving me insane. But, yes, I have a soundboard. I'm very happy. And how about you? How was your weekend? What'd you do? I, myself, finished off Disenchantment, which is airing in its entirety on Netflix. It's the first animated series from Matt Groening. I started watching it when it premiered Friday and binged the rest of the weekend. And I am so happy to have stuck with it. This series, I mentioned it on Friday that I'd watched episodes 1 through 5, and that I was impressed that obviously the cast and the pedigree of the writers and the staff is impeccable, but that I was somehow a little bit sort of, not to be nebulous, but underwhelmed. Like I just expected it to be more intriguing, and all that talent combined with the freedom of Netflix just promised something a little bit more thrilling. And guess what? It delivers. What's more is the reason that I think it took a few episodes, half the season really, for me to really get into it, bodes very well, not only for it having turned out to be a great season when taken as a whole, but for a future several seasons, and there will be more. It's not going to say anything about it, but there's no question that there's going to be a season 2. And I would expect several seasons past that, and they're going to be spectacular. You know, this reminds me, quite frankly, of a couple of things. Both shows that took a little bit of immersion, at least for some, before you really understood what you were dealing with and that there was a classic on your hands. And that is what I feel about Disenchantment. The first example I would compare it to would be another Netflix show. One of the best shows on any network streaming service, just one of my favorite things available in the media landscape today. Little something called BoJack Horseman. Also a Netflix exclusive and also an animated series. Now, I happen to love that from the first moment I watched it. Everything about it spoke to me. The style, the cast, headlined by Will Arnett and Aaron Paul, who obviously are amazing actors and voice actors, and the theme, which these things are very tricky. You know, you've got to speak to people with your theme, and for some, it's the power of the story and the magnetism of the performers and maybe a loyalty to the actors or a fan of Netflix originals. Like, in other words, Glow, a really exciting and interesting concept that speaks to a lot of us for different reasons. Similarly, Mad Men, not a Netflix original, but you can still watch it there. You don't have to come from the world of women's wrestling in the 80s to appreciate Glow. Likewise, you don't need to have experienced Madison Avenue in the 50s to really get into Mad Men. Those stories, those are just their settings, their backdrops. They're stories about people. Everything else is just used for coloring and flavoring and for painting the picture. Mad Men is not about advertising. Mad Men is about Don Draper, Pete, times of change, business, revolutions of gender equality and music and culture, and secrets and lies and maturity and lack thereof. Glow is about many of the same themes. It's one of the best things on TV, too. I recommend it very highly. But Glow took a couple of episodes. BoJack Horseman happened to be about a guy whose career started turbulently in the 90s, had a rough childhood, he was damaged. Now, he was a horse. That affects the storytelling somewhat. But everything is so anthropomorphized. If you came from a rough upbringing or a bit damaged, stumbled into the entertainment industry in the 90s, had a moment of real just, wow, holy crap, what's going on, and then made a bunch of mistakes, and then picked up and had to figure out how to do it all over again, BoJack Horseman might speak to you a little bit more quickly, might be a little bit more accessible when it's really telling your story to you, when you don't have to go, oh, I'm losing myself in this world, when instead you're saying, my God, this is my story being told by this depressed horse. Now, the AV Club, the highly acclaimed review site of The Onion, felt differently about BoJack Horseman. They got to episode 5, much like I did with Disenchantment, and they gave it a D or D- for the first season. They looked at the first episodes. I'm trying to remember season 1. I know that, you met Bojack and Todd and his very basic cast of supporting characters. Todd had caused the first of his many disasters and landed himself in prison. These are all now tropes and recurring themes of BoJack Horseman that have attracted a devoted following and are studied and dissected by fans like me. And on the AV Club, where, in fact, episode 7 or 8 rolled around, and they retracted their entire review of the first bunch of the season. They said, wow, our whole rating system needs to adapt to this new way in which stories are told. We were not prepared for how off-the-charts great this show is, and how much world building it needed for fans. Again, not everyone at the AV Club had an experience like I did in the 90s. That world building can take some time, and it can be a little bit uninviting at first. The other thing I was going to compare Disenchantment to is something totally unrelated to Netflix, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That too, you may not share my opinion on this, but that is one of my favorite things to have aired on television. Granted, in the years since, we're now living in such a golden age. It's been forgotten a bit, but I think it's one of the most important, groundbreaking, and fun shows to have aired on television for decades. It's an all-time classic. It's going to be in the top 20 best TV series forever. In part because so many of these great series now that in many ways really eclipse it, they would not be possible without not only the boundaries that Buffy broke, but with the storytelling techniques that its acolytes and disciples are still using in creating and developing and writing for all these new shows. But go back and watch Buffy Season 1. Try to really divorce yourself from your experience with the show, from your fandom. I know it's hard. Try and imagine what it would be like to go in completely unprepared with that low budget and those terrible special effects and all that world building that would become so necessary that you might say, all right, this episode is rough, this episode is really rough, and then wow, by the season finale, suddenly you were really invested and these characters had become fully realized, the world had been built. And then that season 2 premiere, that just one of the best single episodes of TV ever, and would not have been possible without a first season that it's world building. Even deities don't do it in a single episode. It takes time and occasionally is necessary. By episode 6, Disenchantment is a fully realized, firing on all cylinders, new animated classic in the making. And then it gets better and better and better and really wildly unpredictable, insanely entertaining. And then I'm not saying any more, because it's got a finale that will blow your mind, but I recommend it wholeheartedly. I'm so happy to. First of all, Matt Groening's track record remains, other than latter seasons of The Simpsons, which are kind of getting dull, his pedigree remains perfect, unscathed. He's still batting 1,000. And the cast, Billy West, my all-time favorite voice actor and just an amazing guy who everything he touches turns to platinum. He is just part of the voice cast, as is John DiMaggio. Eric Andre plays one of the leads. The actual lead, main character, Bean, is played by Broad City's Abby Jacobson, who does an incredible job. She is a spectacular actor and voice actor. Matt Berry from the IT Crowd, hearing his voice is I always just think, Papa! He's wonderful. Dave Herman, who you know from Futurama, Adventure Time, Mad TV, a million other things. Not from pro wrestling, and certainly not to be confused with the Dave Herman I mentioned earlier in the show. Not the radio Dave Herman. He is no longer with us. This Dave Herman is awesome. Disenchantment gets 5 stars. Spectacular show. And yes, there are a few episodes where you'll ask yourself, is this building to something? Because I'm having a great time, but I need a payoff. By mid-season, that payoff arrives. You're fully invested. The world is built. I recommend it very highly. I can't think of anything I would do to improve it other than to get the second season up and running ASAP. It's been awesome touching base with you. I apologize for the lack of a crew, but that crew's going to come. Actually, I just spoke with one guy today who will probably be a part of the show next week and possibly going forward. As for you, if you'd like to be a part of it, email me, matt@mattsager.com. matt@mattsager.com. Call me. Don't be creepy about it, but by all means, give a call if you'd like to be a part of the show or be a guest or help promote your product or your client's product. 646-535-4788. Follow me online. Twitter, I'm @MattSager. Facebook, The Matt Sager. And my voiceover page is Matt Sager VO. Instagram, Real Matt Sager. And for more social links, episodes of this podcast, blog posts, articles, my reels, my contact info, everything you could want to do with Matt Sager, go to mattsagervoiceover.com.